Hello, welcome to the Holistic Healer Podcast, a podcast dedicated to all things holistic. I am your host, Cheryl Lee. Today's guest is Wade Lightheart from BioOptimizers. Wade is the co-founder and president of BioOptimizers, an amazing supplement company which has served over 450,000 clients in 90 countries to optimize their health and digestion since 2004. We sit down today to discuss Wade's journey as a 3-time natural bodybuilding champion and Mr. Universe competitor, all while being vegetarian. We discuss using enzymes to optimize for health and longevity, probiotics, gut health, and so much more. Enjoy the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Holistic Healer Podcast. I am your host, Cheryl Lee. And today's guest, I have Wade Lightheart from BioOptimizers. I'm so excited. I actually have to read your accolades here because there's so many. You are the co-founder and president of BioOptimizers, and that's an amazing supplement company which has served over 450,000 clients in 90 countries to optimize their health and digestion since 2004. You are the host of the Awesome Health Podcast. You're a 3-time Canadian all-natural bodybuilding champion and former Mr. Universe competitor, all while being vegetarian. You are an advisor to the American Anti-Cancer Institute, studied exercise physiology and nutrition. You're an author, a high-performance coach, and embodies a holistic lifestyle. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, for sure. So I'd like to kind of start my show off with just a little bit of a background for those of my audience members who might not know who you are. Just what got you into the wellness and the holistic space, kind of going back in time, and take as much time as you need to.
Well, when I was 15, my life transformed. My parents moved from a little town that we were living in rural New Brunswick to a no town, essentially. They became caretakers of a private resort. So it was 5 miles to my nearest neighbor.
Wow.
On a dirt road. The telephone poles ended at our house. And at the same time, my sister, who was 4 years my senior, became ill with Hodgkin's disease, which is a form of cancer of the lymph nodes. And I watched her go through the medical model for the next 4 years before she died at the age of 22.
Oh, wow.
And she had given me a bodybuilding magazine, had a picture of Troy Zuclato, Mr. California, a pretty girl on the cover. And I was like, oh, wow, maybe if I get some muscles, I'll be healthy and I'll get girls. So, as all teenage boys driven mad with testosterone, I built a gym in my barn with set weight sets and pulleys and, tractor tires and really kind of like Rocky IV when he fought Ivan Drago. It was very much like that. And I began training. And I read Arnold Schwarzenegger's Education of a Bodybuilder. And I really resonated with, because he was the biggest star in the world. He had all these muscles. He was living and so I built a dream that I would live in Venice Beach, California. I would own a nutritional supplement company, train at Gold's Gym, and compete at the Mr. Universe contest. I want to be just like him. And eventually all those things did happen. It took me, the better part of 3 decades to make that happen. But along the way, I went to university when I was 18, and I studied exercise physiology at the University of New Brunswick. And what was a wonderful experience of coming to the big city and having all those experiences, and I was really excited about a higher education, what I found was a complete compartmentalization of information. So there was it struck me, I was doing heavy duty training at a period of time, really hot, which we would call high intensity nowadays.
Yes.
And my heart rate dropped 10 beats per minute on the morning over the course of 4 months. And I asked my exercise physiology professor, why did this happen? Right. Nobody was talking about that type of training. And no one talked about stroke volume and pressure and all these sort of things.
Sure.
And he didn't have an answer for me. And I'm like, why am I spending all this money at a university when something seems pretty basic can't be answered by the professor? So at that point, I said, I had enough of this. I'm going to go find people who are producing great results. And I still pursued my passion of lifting weights. Bodybuilding to me was more of an art. It was a way of life. It was an experience that I think they're the original biohackers, because they're offsetting 2 evolutionary biases: the bias to gain body fat as a survival mechanism, and the bias to build a a more than necessary amount of muscle, which is metabolically costly. So bodybuilders have to essentially, overcome those two evolutionary biases, and they use a lot of means to do that. And so I was always fascinated by the experimentation process and the science of bodybuilding and its result, which was the art of the human physique. And so I just started finding people after that. And I went around and I worked in every part of the industry, in the nutrition industry. And when I got to the West Coast of Canada, it was far more expansive, largely in part, I think, because of the influence of Eastern countries, China, India, etc., who, Ayurvedic medicine, acupuncture, spiritual-based healing. There was a whole variety and array of things that hadn't really permeated the rest or the eastern part of the country. And so I fell in love with this and was to go to courses and see people and meet things. There's some woo in there and there's some science, and that's all part of the adventure and part of the fun. And so from that began my own study in Eastern philosophy. And from that began to build a more expansive model of building not just the body from, hey, look at me, I look good, but actually building the internal fortitude, energetic, the elan vital inside of this, in the body that essentially invigorates all aspects of the human psyche and physique and your health. And so that was, I've been on that journey ever since.
Wow, that's so amazing. So how did you come to be a vegetarian? Like, were you raised a vegetarian?
No. I grew up hunting, fishing, had a gun license when I was 14.
Wow.
So I grew up in the rural. We had literally, I'd wake up some morning and there'd be a moose looking in the window or a deer looking in the window.
Yeah, you were really rural.
I was in the woods, big time. I always make a joke. I was so far back in the woods, they had to pipe daylight into me. So I grew up in that environment. Now, the value of that, although I wasn't happy about it at the time as a 15-year-old boy, was I learned what silence is.
Oh, yeah.
Inner silence. And I think that's something that's really missing in today's world, especially amongst our youth. They don't know what that is. And if they did, they were very uncomfortable with it. So I didn't realize the value of it later on until when I first read a book called Autobiography of a Yogi in 1996.
I love that book.
Yeah. And I was fascinated with Yogananda's dissertation of spirituality. And he seemed to solve all of the problems that I had encountered with Christianity without throwing the baby without the bathwater. And I thought that was really unique. It was a unification of these essential teachings of Krishna and essential teachings of Christ with a scientific methodology of helping you. I was like, wow, this is great. I didn't get into the meditation part directly with his organization at first. I began, kind of kicking around and finding things. I got into the more science side. I read a book called Super Learning. And inside of that, they talked about using music in trance to activate alternative states. So I did that, and then concordantly got into the party world after I retired from regular bodybuilding in 98. And that's when I say regular bodybuilding, that's the bodybuilding that's untested, drugs, go all in.
Got you.
None of that. And then fell into the kind of underground party scene, and just had an absolute manic time for a couple of years, which, had some upsides and some.
You marinated in that for a little while.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it was really the recovery of my feeling of loss when I left bodybuilding. There was no tested events and stuff like that. And I realized that bodybuilding kind of emerged into a drug cult. You had to have the genetics for the muscles and the internal biological capability to manage the drugs so that you would survive long enough to win. And, Ronnie Coleman was on the scene by that time. It was like, well, there's nothing I'm going to do humanly to beat Ronnie Coleman. It doesn't matter what I do. He's a different human being. And so in the middle of the partying, a serendipitous bunch of events that won't go into too much detail, but it's completely out of the jello tree, as you like to say.
Yes.
I got gifted some books on Yogananda. Not on Yogananda, on Vivekananda, his precursor that came to the Chicago event in 1898 and talked about common sense about yoga. And he said, if you get involved in that book, he said, if you get involved in drugs and trance and these activating states without a true spiritual teacher, you end up as a mental and spiritual wreck. And I'm like, oh my God, this is what's happened to me. Well, I need a teacher. Yogananda shows up, and I started his philosophy and really embracing Eastern philosophy. 6 months later, in 2001, I read a book called The Holy Science.
Okay.
And in The Holy Science, there was an argument by Yogananda's guru about what is the right diet for meditation. And he talked about the canines, the length of the digestive canal, the nervous system response to, say, blood compared like between omnivores, carnivores, and herbivores, and the variance of that, or the response to, say, an orchard and the salivary response inside of humans versus what happens when you see animals dying or blood. And I thought, wow, now you got to realize at this point, like, I'm a hardcore meat. If there's no meat in the meal, it's a snack. And I went, that's a pretty good argument. I'll experiment. Now, I was terrified to become a vegetarian. Terrified. I was so indoctrinated with the cult dynamics of bodybuilding that if I'm going to not eat animal protein or whatever, I'm going to dry out and blow away. Yeah. So I said, I'll do a 2-week experiment. I can handle 2 weeks. So I did 2 weeks, and I was like, okay, I didn't dry out and blow. I'll try another 2 weeks. And after a month, I said, I'll do another month. And I did 2 months. And I just said, I guess I'm done. That's it. So it wasn't like, hey, I'm trying to like be on some vigilante vegan and trying to change the world, all that sort of stuff. It just seemed to work. And then I got excited about the idea of competing without drugs, drug tested competitions. I said, okay, I want to get off. I want to make sure that I'm not going into the recreational drug world. Yes. I really love this sport. This is a way I can, clean myself up and be doing bodybuilding content. And I'm going to do it as a vegetarian because everybody says that you can't do that. So I want to find out if that's true because nobody I knew tried it. Wow. So I said, well, how do you know if you don't try? So I tried it. And 2 years later, I was standing on stage at the Mr. Universe contest.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. So it was really wild.
So, so for me, it's so funny. So I've basically been a raw foodist for the last 30 years, but I've come off the wheel and I've gotten back on the wheel and I've experimented with different things along the way. I went fully carnivore actually for a very short period of time and felt terrible. And I did the paleo and I've done pretty much everything, but I always circled back around to the living foods. And now I consider myself more of a high raw because I do incorporate some cooked foods. I do use some protein, these types of things. And especially now because I'm in my 50s and the whole aging thing, which we can talk about later. But I did hear you in one interview say that you did have was it a couple of years that you incorporated a raw food diet?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got introduced to a fellow by the name of Dr. Michael O'Brien. You might have heard of him.
Okay.
So he was probably one of the most energized, vibrant, healthy-looking senior citizens I ever met. He gave a seminar not long, actually, while I was prepping for the Mr. Universe and put some ideas in my head that was very counter to the bodybuilding culture. And then I went to a seminar with him in early 2004 when Matt and I had just started our company together. And he ate a high enzymatic diet, probiotics, using special tocotrienols, amino acids, and minerals and vitamins, and ate a raw food diet. And I went, that's pretty wild. And I had just destroyed my gut health competing in the Mr. Universe. So I was like, okay, I got to fix this. And I did that. And his system worked and I felt amazing. So then I started so I did that for Tuesday and I began experimenting with how little protein that I would need to consume in order to produce the results I want in a weight training environment. And using the enzymes and probiotics we developed and stuff, I was able to whittle myself down to 85 grams. Now, before I was consuming between 200 and 250 grams. And I got down to 85, but I had an optimized digestion. So I'm extracting all of the amino acids out of that as opposed to maybe I might have been eating 200 grams of protein, but I might have only been getting 50, 70 grams of amino acids. And a lot of people don't understand that. And so I loved it. I felt amazing. It was extremely vibrant. There was only one downside. It ruined my social life.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to invite me to the party.
Yeah.
And then because they felt very uncomfortable
Yes.
that I was they felt more uncomfortable than I did. I was okay, but it was an issue for that. And then I remember going to the Raw Food Festival in Sedona, Arizona, and this waif-like character comes up to me and did not look healthy. But
Yeah.
he had this kind of glazed eye look, and he comes up and he goes, "What percentage of raw are you?" And I was like, "Oh my God, this is a cult.
I'm in a cult.
I'm in a cult." And my business partner's wife, she ran out of the event. She was terrified. She had to go get some burgers or something. And she thought this was the craziest thing ever. And it was. Now, from that, I became very clear being exposed to the bodybuilding cult and the raw food cult is how diet cults emerge.
Yes.
And why they emerge and why we can easily get ensnared in them. There are some strengths and weaknesses to these cults as they help stabilize maybe some unhealthy habits, but they in themselves are not the answer as is.
Right.
There's no one single dietary strategy that everybody can go to.
Sure.
And that's what kind of led us. And then 2007, so did it for just over 2 years. And then I came out of that and just went to like probably 80 or 90% raw food.
Uh-huh.
And then when I went to when I came back and did the 2007 comeback, so after 2003, I had retired. And then 2007, I went back and won a bunch of championships and went to the Worlds again. I did that on a raw food diet. So I competed at the world level on a raw food diet just to demonstrate that I could do it, and not for anybody, any accolades, just for myself.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So So how did you, like, I imagine there were some like kind of going into that space of the living foods. Like I fell into that category myself where I was on a raw food diet and I was feeling great. I decided that I wanted to compete. My first competition, I was in my 30s, and I hired a trainer at the time. It wasn't Kevin, it was somebody else for my first competition. And she said, "Well, that's great, but there's no way, like you cannot compete the way you're eating." And I believed her. I thought, okay, well, it's a goal. I want to compete. So I completely abandoned that. And I did the typical bro diet, right? Tilapia, broccoli, brown rice, and protein powder basically around the clock. And I felt terrible during that whole time, but it was only because I didn't believe that I could do it, because back then there were no resources at all.
No.
At like nothing. So I just believed, just firsthand what she told me. And then I came off of that and then I started incorporating it again. And then that's a whole other story in and of itself. But what were some of the setbacks that you experienced during that time when you were prepping, for example, for a bodybuilding show using raw foods?
I didn't have any because it took me 4 years to kind of figure out the mechanics of it.
Okay.
And I spent a tremendous amount of time, effort, and energy on cultivating an optimized digestive system using really potent proteolytic enzymes and really potent proteolytic probiotics. So like I said, it took me 4 years to figure that out. The first thing was, so I can say precursor to that, what did I have to figure out on the way that I could do that?
Yeah, right.
Was number one, overcoming the psychological belief system that I could do it.
Yes.
The second thing was dealing with the satiety issue. So one of the advantages of a high protein diet, and why I think a lot of people in a dietary will do well on it, is because of satiety. Yes. Turns out, years later, I found this out. I have a suboptimal gene for satiety. In other words, my body doesn't register I'm full until I'm over full. So it's very easy for me to overeat. I love food, especially around social situations, or I'm also an emotional eater, psychology. We talk about some of those things in my book.
Yep.
About addressing the emotional, psychological, spiritual, and cultural aspects. And culturally, I like to have social around food.
Yes.
Psychologically, in celebration or in emotional downfields, I'm going to eat on those things. And then you have to overcome whatever programming that you grew up on.
Yes.
Right. Whatever this is the facts. This is the way things is. You got to eat meat or you can't eat meat or whatever that happens to be. Those are real factors. So that was that. So I figured out the satiety factor through a lot of fibrous foods. So these massive salads that I would use to
Gosh.
substitute that.
They look like a horse trough, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it was a little bit harder figuring out how to load up for glycogen retention, because when you're on a raw food diet, particularly, you're just eating natural food, so you don't have that same glycogen push that you would have to get that swole, full look in a bodybuilding community where you would use more refined or simpler sugars or things like that. So there was a whole, those are a couple of the obstacles. And then monitoring the caloric content, because on a raw food diet, what tends to happen is people kind of go a little bit crazy on the nuts. And the caloric content of the nuts could be really high. And so there's two camps, the calories in, calories out camp. And then there's the magic camp, which believes that if, as long as it's raw, you can eat as much of it as you want. It's like, no, you can't.
Not really.
If you're trying to get below your natural set point of body fat percentage, and bodybuilders and fitness competitors are going way low, no way in hell that you are not going to have to maintain an extreme caloric deficit for an extended period of time.
Yes.
And every bodybuilder gets in shape. Like the worst competitor in a fitness or bodybuilding show is better than the average person will ever be in their best life. And you never know it by the criticism of the crowd. But I mean, so true. That community has figured out weight loss, and I don't think they get enough credit for it. I don't think they get recognized for it. People project a lot of things into the industry, but that industry has figured it out. The thing that I think they're challenged in is maintaining a stable body fat level after. It's one of the reasons why we talk about reverse dieting, and I made those mistakes myself.
So you're not blowing up like a balloon afterwards. And
very common that happens for bodybuilders, and it's really bad for girls, especially if they're young. And hormonally, it can be very disruptive.
Well, hormonally and psychologically, the effect too, because I think that, in that space, we become very defined by the way we look. It's a gauge or a marker of basically how we feel about ourselves. And I think that it's really easy to fall into that trap of, oh, well, now I've gained weight, and then trying to mentally realize that it's not sustainable to keep that low body fat all the time, right? So there's the mental aspect that comes along with it too, that I feel like if you don't get that in check when you're younger, if you decide to get into the bodybuilding space, then it can come back to bite you later on in life. If you're moving through your life and all you think you are as a definition of yourself is the exterior, right?
Correct.
Yeah, for sure. So when you were using enzymes, for example, to kind of help with that process, were those your enzymes at the time, or were you were, okay, got you.
Yeah, so we built our own enzyme in 2005.
Okay.
So my first experiment was with Dr. O'Brien's work. And then from that, we wanted to adapt to a more potent version, because proteolytic enzymes are relatively expensive.
Right.
And there's different types of proteolytic enzymes that work in different pH balance. So Matt and I, my business partner, we decided that we were going to go off and build our own. And we were really going to go all in on it. And it was crazy expensive, but we didn't care because we were doing it for this experiment, and it was working. And it worked. And we were coaching for the first 4 years of our business. We coached about 15,000 people in around there, around the world. And virtually all of them noticed improvements in recovery and muscle gain and digestive function when they were using our enzyme product. And that became our flagship product. It's 20 years later, we just released the fourth version of that. We have a lab in Bosnia that does all our experimentation now. And I know for a fact that it's 600% better than the second leading brand. And it's 2,400% better than the leading brand on store shelves today.
Yeah.
And that's been a long evolution for us to be able to get to that point. But proteolytic enzyme, to me, that was the defining factor that allowed me to be successful on a plant-based diet and on a vegetarian diet. I don't know if I could have done it without those elements.
Yeah.
It certainly made a big difference for me.
That's what I was going to say. Like how, for example, somebody who's wanting to compete using a really high protein animal-based diet, the difference between using an enzyme, a proteolytic enzyme, and not must be like night and day. But if you hadn't tried it, you wouldn't know. Like,
well, I'm friends with, I'm going to Mr. Olympia this coming weekend.
Cool.
And I'm the guest of Natalia Coella, who's defending her championship. Both her and the former Mr. Olympia are using our digestive health products, and many other professional athletes are. So as at the professional ranks of bodybuilding, where there are extreme levels of muscularity, they require tremendous amounts of food. And largely in part, that's the hardest part of the sport, trying to eat enough to sustain the growth in their body. And many of the sports elite end up dropping out due to digestive related health issues that they just overload that system, and that becomes the limiting factor.
Yeah.
And many of them found relief by using these digestive aids. And so I also think that's a problem within the population that are eating a lot of bad foods for them, compromising their digestion, getting leaky gut, all that sort of stuff. And so all the bloating and problems that people have are directly related to gastrointestinal issues.
For sure, for sure. So how, in your experience over the years, like how have you or did you navigate some of those negative aspects of the bodybuilding space, like mentally, emotionally, physically, trying to, because I know that there was a point where you kind of blew up after you came off of your diet. How did you navigate that?
Well, I'll talk about a couple of things. First off, I'm very fortunate in life. Despite the challenges of having my sibling die, the upside of that, or if there is a silver lining within it, is I knew that my health wasn't a guarantee and my life wasn't a guarantee.
Right.
And that was something I discovered in a formative age. So that's been front and center with my life the whole time. And it's allowed me to kind of embrace things and not worry so much about what other people think, because it's like, you know what? You'd only get so long here on the planet. And most people don't think about you as much as you think that they care.
They do. Yeah, totally.
So you can just get out of that. Most of it's artifacts of your own thinking. I didn't win my first contest. Like, I didn't win a contest for 10 years. I had no business being in a bodybuilding contest. I have terrible genetics. I loved what I was doing so much, and I just put forth my best effort. And when I lost, I would just walk over and shake the person's hands, like, congratulations. That was the best I could be. And because I knew I was competing, essentially they made me better. And then eventually I won. And I remember winning the first contest. And so the cool part was, I remember being backstage after, and I got all the trophies and the prizes and all that and the pictures. And I remember thinking, I just want everybody to feel like this. To have won at something that was really hard. It took me 10 years to do this. Nobody said I could do it. And then finally I succeeded. I wanted everybody to have that feeling in their life, period. When I went to the national championship and I saw that it became a drug cult, and I was like, okay, this is not what I got into the sport. Again, this is going to compromise my health.
Yes.
And I don't want to do that. And so I stepped out and then fell into the party world as a recovery component. So there was a psychological and social identification with looking a certain way, especially when you're using anabolics and things like that. Like, it's nothing to you to add, for a guy to add, 20 pounds or 30 pounds of muscle in a year, which is a ginormous, like when you imagine 20 or 31 pound steaks and then just throw them all over. That's the difference with 20 or 30. Yeah, exactly. It's night and day. So you had to overcome that psychological hurdle, the loss of hormones. And for men, particularly, I can't speak for women, but for men, high testosterone levels are euphoric in the mind.
Right.
Like, it makes you feel great. You're on point. You have confidence. I think women respond to the pheromones in you. Like, it's just a different thing. You got to come off that, and that's all taken away from you. And then you go, and so then I fell into the party world, which is a whole other, and a lot of bodybuilders and fitness competitors are in that world.
Yeah.
And so, I got trapped into that thing. And then when I came out of that and found spirituality, I was like, okay, well, what are the things that I like doing? I like to train. I like to be fit and healthy. Yes. And I like the sport. So maybe I can't compete at the highest level, but I can do it as something that is an expression of me because I actually enjoy doing the experimentation. And at that point, I transcended the sport, the value of the discipline and the training and the diet and the experimentation and all that now became just pure art for me. It was a way of being that I could translate and carry over to my clients and to our business and to the development of products. And that's why I would take these extreme trials like raw food and do a contest.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to put things on an extreme level, like a Formula One racer drives around the track at 200 miles, which is crazy to me. But technology from that car is applied in our daily drivers en masse. So I embraced that. And then after 07, I was good until last year when I was 50. I said, you know what? I'm going to see if I can get back in shape again for a contest.
Wow.
And I went back and ended up winning the Ironman International and went to the Worlds again.
Really? That's amazing. Yeah. Wow. Congratulations. That's so it's just like breaking down those thought patterns that so many people that, it's not possible, can't do it this way.
That's right. And then right after the show, I decided I'm going to go run a marathon now. I've never run since I was a teenager. What? So 6 months later, after competing at the Mr. Olympia, I ran my first marathon in Vancouver last year. And it was like,
really?
Okay. Yeah. So I wanted to, again, challenge these collective beliefs that get indoctrinated that seem like truths, but aren't. And like bodybuilding and running, that doesn't work. Bodybuilding without drugs, that doesn't work. Bodybuilding on a raw food diet, all these doing a plant-based diet and being in a muscle, all of those things I wanted to break down.
It's really just limiting beliefs.
Correct. And that's the spiritual side. And to me, that's the spiritual side, is about recognizing that there is an infinite field that invigorates and supports all things in this existence. And it manifests in us. And there is unique aspects of that manifestation.
Yes.
And to trust it, whatever that might be, provided it's not hurting you and other people, you go and express that. And that's part of the unique expression of our ego and why we have an ego. It's not something to be in an enemy about. It's like, okay, this is me, but it's not really me. It's kind of like I'm acting the show. Here's the show. It's the Wade show. And I can laugh at myself and be humorous and go, why am I doing this? And I'm such a goofball. And it's funny, and it doesn't have that, that stickiness that when you're like in your 20s, maybe.
Yeah, right. It rolls off your shoulders much easier, and I think that when you have a spiritual practice, and you embody and you're able to integrate that, I'm the creator of my own reality. It's only the limiting beliefs that I'm putting on myself that I can't do something. And really, it doesn't really matter what it happens to be. And but for you to be able to go out and be like, I'm going to do this. That's like amazing, because you're breaking down that narrative, right? That, you can't do this. Even now, I mean, I don't know that there's any raw foodists within the bodybuilding space. I think you're kind of the pioneer there.
I think it's pretty unique. It's really weird.
There's more vegetarians now, for sure.
Yeah. When I first did it, there was none. Ever. Right. Everybody told me it wasn't possible. And I said, well, let's see. And it turned out it was possible.
Yeah, it was possible.
It was possible.
Would it have been possible without the enzymes and the support that you had, like, exogenously?
I don't think I would have been as successful.
Yeah.
I think it was possible. But these were things that I was very clear had a definable effect. And that's the beauty of building some sort of constraint system. Mm-hmm. You can test one element at a time and see if that's producing a result. Now, that's not scientific and a double-blind study, but it is a scientific process of seeing, what do I do? It's like the same thing as, if I add cardio to my training, if I change my protein or my macro. Bodybuilders are continuously doing these experiments and then checking the result. And it puts them in a unique position of developing a hyper awareness about what works for them. Mm-hmm. And out of that, you can develop theories that can be tested on mass. And that's essentially what I've done in my own world. And,
that's amazing. Do you still incorporate a relatively high raw diet?
Yeah. So let me see. mornings are usually a raw food protein that I have. Like I made my own with BioOptimizers. And then I'll do a massive salad in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And then usually some other protein serving in the day. I eat fruits and vegetables. And then in the evening, usually I'll have some cooked food. I like the hearty foods, especially in the evening, like, rice or potatoes and lots of
Yam or things like that.
cooked green vegetables.
Yeah.
I love that stuff. Beans, legumes, things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Usually it's a heavier food that I get that comfort feeling at night.
Yeah. I do the same thing. I'm kind of like try to keep it as raw during the day. And then usually I'll have a salad, but I'll incorporate something like some yam I bake with olive oil or,
Mm-hmm.
Brussels sprouts or, something to that effect, just to,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, it's like you're just feeling like something, especially, well, I don't know where you are right now, but it's cold as heck here. So
I'm in
like,
Venice Beach, California.
oh
So
yeah.
pretty
Well,
good.
I'm jealous then because it's like 0 degrees here. It's crazy.
Yikes.
So you and I are kind of the same in the same age,
Yep.
group. And so for me personally, I'm going to be interested to hear your thoughts on this, but the notion of health span versus lifespan,
Yes.
and that back in my 20s, 30s, and even really in my 40s, honestly, I wasn't paying a lot of attention to longevity as kind of the basis. It was still more about like my performance at the gym and, what I lifted on my deadlift, these types of things. And now my focus has changed now to more of the health span and really thinking about how, as I'm aging, my choices are going to help me so that I'm not aging in a way that I'm not going to be mobile like so many,
Mm-hmm.
we see even in their 70s now. It's like, you see little men and women kind of with their canes, and I don't want that. So how have you shifted your perspective on the way that you've implemented things in your life to maybe support more of a longevity perspective, if you even do that at this
I
point?
do.
Mhm.
Longevity has actually been active in my brain from the very get-go
Wow, good. Wow,
because of my
amazing.
sister's death. And I was
Sure.
confronted with, hey, your life isn't a guarantee and your health isn't a
Yeah.
guarantee. And so
Yeah.
that I was always thinking of my initial foray into exercise science was to prevent a similar outcome for me. So I was already coming from how do I extend my life
Right.
right now? The other thing was, as I was influenced a lot by senior citizens when I was a young child, I used to go out and see my grandparents at the senior citizens home. And I was fascinated with older people as a young person. I would spend
Mm.
time with them and ask them questions about life
Yeah.
and all sorts of interesting things. And I got insight. And then as I was always mesmerized by older individuals who showed a high level of fitness, whether it was at the gym or on television or these.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, what are they doing to look so
Yes.
good at that age?
Yeah.
And we had three centurions, or centenarians, I should say, on my street in my first little
Really?
village. Yes, and one of them's still alive today. She's 106 years old.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And I noticed a couple things about that I can share that I was always interested in. And then, of course, I was reading Eastern philosophy and I was hearing about yogis who had unusually long lives, far in excess of anything that we had imagined, particularly
Yes.
one in Yogananda's book, Trilanga Swami, who is reportedly 300 years old.
Yes. I've heard of that one
And
too.
so I was like, okay. And then they had these technologies called the Kalpa, or whatever I think its name. That's I'm probably butchering that. Which is a regeneration technique that would rejuvenate the body and de-age people on an extreme level. This was Ayurvedic practices. So I became fascinated, studying Eastern philosophy and stuff. And when I
Yeah.
met Michael O'Brien, particularly, here is a senior
Mm.
citizen guy in his 70s, and he just radiated health and vitality. And I was like,
Wow.
okay, I got to learn from this guy. I studied Dr. Howell in food enzymes for health and longevity.
Yes. I've heard. Hmm.
And so with all the species, if you were giving them exogenous enzymes and they would live longer than the species that didn't. They had capability to procreate later in life. They had normalized social behavior and less genetic diseases. And I was like, okay, that seems really good. And then when as you get older and you start seeing your hormonal capabilities start to drop off a little bit, things like this thing, then you really get hyper motivated. Then it's like, okay, now we're going to get into it. And Matt and I came up with what we call the biospan, which is the length of life, but also the quality of your health during that. And you want to kind of have both. Nobody wants to live long and be decrepit.
Exactly.
And no one wants to be, the healthiest guy in the graveyard, on a short life.
Right.
So how do you combine those two ideologies in a more unified practice? And that's what we do. And to this date now, as a 50-year-old in some recent interventions, and I can share this with your listeners that I think are very powerful, intravenous NAD treatments.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Phenomenal. Some people will boost those up a few times a year and then maintain subcutaneous NAD injections. I think NAD, like at 750 to 1,000 milligrams for 5 days, is incredible.
Okay.
There's a lot of new peptide technology that is amazing on regenerative capabilities. And the big one, then there's exosomes, stem cells, and V cells. And exosomes, I've tried those. They're extraordinary in repair and regeneration. I've tried some repair peptide, both for cognitive function and for physiological. Extraordinary results on those.
Yep.
And then I've taken stem cells, which were also regenerative. And it's found that I had an injury that my former coach, Scott Abel, said, you just better get used to. I was able to recover that completely. It took time, but I was able to cover that completely. And then recently I took V cells, and the results of those are unbelievable in regenerative technology. Took 4 years off my physiological age within 2 months. And I can feel what that feels like. So, and then I look at suboptimal genetics. So if you do a genetics test, so for example, I have suboptimal detoxification pathways. So I have a HOCAT machine here. Okay. And a HOCAT machine is pumping like ozone into a capsule and a steam capsule, put CO2 first, and then ozone. And then you do light therapy, PEMF technology. There's a bunch of frequency technologies in it. And it's high temperature with ozone. So you detox really quickly. So I find if I do that a couple times a week, I feel like I've been like deep clean in my body, monitoring blood sugar, making sure I get optimal nutrition around my suboptimal methylation pathways and stuff like that. So, for example, I got to make sure I get extra B12 and B6 because of my vegetarian diet and my pathways. I got to make sure I keep my magnesium high. I have to be mindful of all these other things. So I customize based on what are the things that are going to take me out. Like I have suboptimal genetics for stroke and heart disease. So a plant-based diet is really good on that, provided I have enough protein that I'm not eating too much carbohydrates and sugars, which I love. And then so I mitigate that with fiber and protein. And then I take an essential fatty acid from a plant-based source to get all my EFAs. So I get this really good algae oil butter that's like chocolate and fudge.
What's that? I want some of that.
I'll let you know. It's a company called Synergy. Dr. Laura runs it. It is the best essential fatty acid I've ever had as a vegetarian. It's amazing.
Oh, I'm going to get some of that. Thank you.
It's so good. Like your first day, you'll probably eat a bunch of spoonfuls of it because it's this almond butter fudge.
Oh, I'm excited.
Yeah, it's great.
So where do you stand on, or what are your thoughts on bioidentical hormones as for aging for both men and women?
Yeah, I think the data is extremely supportive for using them for quality of life. Now, we don't know yet as to date because we don't have enough composite data for enough of a period to see if it is legitimately going to extend past our normal biospan. But I think it's pretty clear that for quality of life, it's hard to argue with the benefits. So I've been encouraging my father to do it. I have yet to do that because I was doing natural competitions and I'm trying to kick the can a little bit further because I'm hoping to have children. And one of the downsides is if you're taking for a man like TRT, you could drop your sperm count or nullify your sperm count. So I don't want to go down that route yet.
Okay.
That being said, it is something that I will most likely engage in unless they come up with some other better technology beforehand. And for like, if you look at my dad who has cardiovascular conditions and you look at all the data, guys that go on TRT that have had cardiovascular incidents, they extend their life expectancy by a significant amount.
Wow.
As well as the quality of their life. So, triglyceride levels improve, heart output improves, recovery damage to the tissues improve. And you can use a variety of enzymes and things like that as well, like nattokinase and serrapeptase to reduce those things. I'm all for those things as well. You use everything that you can, but I think, bioidentical hormones, probably the way to go for me.
The way to go, yeah. So I just wanted to kind of switch gears then a little bit. Well, we kind of have been talking about enzymes, but I wanted to get a little bit deeper into your enzymes specifically, the BioOptimizers. I use the Masszymes, which is absolutely amazing. And so in the living food space, there's a fair amount of people that have come onto my show. There's different doctors who have come on who are, raw food doctors who promote that type of a lifestyle. And enzymes is one of the major players when you're talking about a raw food diet. It's like, well, the food is living, all the enzymes are intact. And once we cook the food, we destroy the enzymes and it becomes dead and lifeless, and it creates a whole host of problems in the body, all these types of things. So a couple of questions. When it comes to taking exogenous enzymes, the first question that I get a lot is, will that affect your body's ability to make its own enzymes moving?
No, there's no evidence to support that. And here's the thing. I think that a lot of people forget. All species on the planet, herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, fruitivores, whatever.
Yep.
All eat an enzymatically rich diet.
Right.
The exception is humans.
Right.
So every other animal eats all its food in a raw food. Now, if you feed the animals cooked food, they start developing human-like conditions.
Yes.
So, and for people listening that haven't heard of this concept, there is your specific enzyme capacity. In other words, your body, let's say it can produce, we'll call it for simple purposes, illustration, 100 units of enzymatic capacity. Well, enzymes are involved in everything from thinking to blinking. We have 25,000 different enzymatic pathways that we know of, probably a whole lot more. And they are essentially accelerators in the conversion process of, food into usable materials or waste products to be eliminated as opposed to being a toxin, and a variety of energetic pathways. So when you eat a cooked food diet, a portion of that 100% enzymatic production capability is going to be devoted to your food. That's why people get tired after a big meal, because all the blood's going in there. You need to shunt all the enzyme activity of the rest of the body over there. So now let's say, and I would suggest that probably at least half of the enzymatic capacity of humans are being utilized to digest their food.
Yeah.
So as you age, the cost of eating doesn't go down, but your capacity to make more enzymes does.
Right.
So now you're running at 80% and 70%. And people go, I don't have the energy I had before. Well, where does energy come from? Energy comes from an electron covalent transfer at the cellular level, which is basically you taking a biochemical conversion, which is required by an enzyme to convert that energy into the movement of electrons in through the cell.
Right.
And that's what gives us vitality. And the more vitality, the more radiant we become. We can actually pick this up using photography, that people who are healthier, actually the cell, the mitochondria, produces more light. And they have a lighter, brighter, healthier construct. They look vibrant. And there's a vibration attached to it. So the idea of taking exogenous enzymes, we're supposed to be getting enzymes in our food if we ate it in a raw food state.
Right.
Even if you're eating raw food, the chances that all the enzymes that were produced in that, unless you're growing it yourself and getting it from your local environment and you're using heirloom seed and it hasn't been adulterated and sort of that stuff, then and only then, and there are people doing it.
Yes.
There are, and most of them are extremely vibrant and healthy.
Yes.
And they live an extremely restrictive lifestyle. That's not going to work for me. I tried it.
Hormones,
I want both.
yes.
I'm gonna say, you know what? I'm gonna eat this cooked food, but I got exogenous enzymes and some probiotics I'm gonna throw into this mix so that I'm not tapping into my enzymatic reserve bank account. I keep that intact, and it's working for me. Like I said, I'm 50. I feel good. I'm 51 now, I guess. Feel good. I'm still producing it at a high level. Now. And I'm not augmenting with hormones.
Right.
And if I was to add hormones to the mix, it's going to give me another boost again. And so hormones are like regulators to the suboptimal aspects of being a human. So in other words, we release adrenaline and cortisol, or, a woman goes through a complete ovulation cycle to make her fertile at certain points. Guys have a 24, like women have a 28-day cycle, thereabouts. Men have a 24-hour cycle. So testosterone levels are high in the morning. They're ready to go, full of, they can. That's why fasting for women, generally, if they're doing fasting, is better for them to fast later in the day, eat in the morning. And for men, it's to fast in the morning and eat later in the day.
Later in the day, right.
Because of the hormone cycle. So hormones are great regulators of suboptimal conditions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So really, even if somebody's eating 100% raw food diet, unless, like you just explained, they still can benefit from taking an exogenous enzyme to help with their digestion process and everything else. Really.
I believe they will, and I have yet to see any who have been willing to experiment with that not see a benefit to it. Mm-hmm. So it comes down to the individual. It comes down to the individual, and they're willing to experiment with their own biases.
Yeah. So another thing too is there's a lot of, in the space, and I'm sure you're aware of it, there's a lot of emphasis on detoxification.
Yes.
And detoxification through water fasting, through juice feasting for, longer periods of time. And I know that there's a difference. So for example, you taking an enzyme daily with your meals to help the digestive process, but then there's more of a therapeutic application. For example, if you were doing a water fast or a juice fast and you decided to take high doses of enzymes, or like a protease, I guess, based enzyme, where you're going to be going in and breaking down those old proteins. Have you seen detoxification be supported by using these enzymes at a higher dose during that time, and what might come out of people?
I'm so glad you asked this question. So I've been doing fasting since 2000. Mm-hmm. And that was a radical experiment as a bodybuilder, fasting. That was the enemy of the people, basically. Yeah. So I started with 1 day fast, and then I did some juice cleanses with herbs. Mm-hmm. I remember the old Flora.
Oh my gosh!
Cleanse, right, way back in the day.
Oh, in the box, yes.
Yeah, the Sambu cleanse. I did those.
I bought that.
Yeah, I did the Master cleanse. I did that one, and then I did juice fast. I did colonics with the fast, and then I got into. I started looking at the mechanic, and I started doing water fast, and I thought, what is making the impact here? Like, what is the detoxification? Like, what's accelerating the detox? I noticed the difference. Yeah. And I could feel the difference, and I could see the difference. And when I did it with my clients and stuff, like, they all benefit. And I thought, well, what is the mechanism here? What is really happening in fasting? And I went, I think when you're fasting, you're freeing up this enzymatic capacity to stop shunting energy to digestion, and then putting more to healing and regeneration in the body. So I said, well, if that's the case, what if I jack up the enzyme amount, right? What would happen? So I tested, I'm not recommending people do this. I tested 1,000 enzymes a day.
Wow.
To see if it would show up in my stool, and it didn't. In other words, my body absorbed all of the enzymes. And I felt kind of high, but it was good. So then as I said, well, okay, I'm going to do a 10-day fast, and I'm going to do 100 enzymes a day and about 50 of these proteolytic probiotics, because I knew if that you were detoxing, part of the problem if you start detoxing too fast is you can build up toxins in various areas and be compromised.
Right.
Well, I discovered that was true. I was on 100 enzymes a day, and I started to get this strange pain in my liver.
Oh my
Only it went
goodness.
from
Oh my goodness.
strange to painful to sharp to excruciating. And I went to my colon therapist and said, well, let's do a colonic or something. Like, let's do
Yeah.
that. And he's like, look, we did a colonic. He's like, there's nothing in you. He says, like, I said, what do you think it is? He says, it seems like, your liver's swollen. It says you're detoxifying at your liver.
Yeah. Oh,
And I'm
yeah.
like, oh, okay, but it's not releasing for some reason. I didn't know I had suboptimal detoxification pathways. That was probably part of the
Right.
issue. So I said, well, I heard, he said, well, there, you can do a saline broth. So you mix
Okay.
like 38% salt and water, like a salt water brine. Like, this is not just like salt water. This is nasty.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I can only
So I
imagine.
filled up a big liter of that and decided I would just hold my nose and gun it down. And I did that and lay down on my bed and kind of just pulled so that whatever water drink I did would pool around my liver, and hopefully that
Yeah.
sodium would pull that toxin out. And about 30 minutes later, I had to run to the bathroom and vomit. And when I did, it was this bright yellowish look poisonous. I wish I could have got a sample. It just went all down the sink and was gone.
Oh.
And 95% of the pain left my liver, and I went into a state of euphoria.
Really? Wow.
And I was like, OMG, this really works. And so even when the pain was debilitating, it wasn't messing up my cognitive capability or whatever. It was really hard. I knew that I was going through a healing crisis.
Crisis, yes.
And that was my most extreme case of doing that. And I've had a variety of people who have used high dosages, 25, 50, 75, or 100 in severe cases in conjunction with fasting. And I do believe they produce an accelerated result from the process.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've heard there's a couple people actually who that have healed, cancer, for example, through fasting and the use of enzymes.
Yeah, there's if people want to do the research, so I'm an advisor to the American Anti-Cancer Institute. Now, I'm not advocating or recommending or suggesting or diagnosing or healing. I think I cover all my legal bases here.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you want to check out a Dr. Gonzalez in all of his research information about high dosages of enzymes in a variety of cancers. And he was able to certainly produce results that would challenge many of the medical models and treatment programs that are available for people today. So I think if someone's in one of those situations, it's worth doing their research. Yeah. Hippocrates advocates a lot of that. They have a healing center, a raw food place, and all that sort of stuff, and they do that. Gabriel Cousins and Victor Kovinskas and some of the legends inside the industry, they've all produced extraordinary results with people. So test everything, investigate. It's worth the while.
I had Gabriel Cousins on my show a couple months ago, and
that's so cool.
Yeah, it was pretty. I know. I remember getting his book, Conscious Eating.
Yeah,
that was one of my first books that I got.
Great book.
Yeah, the big, massive book, and it was it was really, it's amazing. I remember he was like one of the OGs, right?
The OGs for sure.
One of the OGs, and he's like in his 80s now, and he starts all of his podcasts with dancing, right?
Yeah.
So the way he moves his body is like, OMG, it's crazy to watch him move, and it's just so inspiring, and plus just he's such a beautiful human being. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was the probiotics. So I have these ones, the
P3OM.
Yeah. So what makes this one different than just, for example, going and buying like a probiotic at your local health food store?
Well, P3OM stands for Powerful Proteolytic Probiotic. And what does proteolytic mean? Most probiotics feed off some sort of fiber or sugar. That's primarily what they live on. So you're seeing now a lot of the technology called symbiotics. What is it that feeds the bacteria? And there's a variety of tests that you can do to see what the various bacteria lives on. Now, when it comes to proteolytic probiotics, there are very few strains. L. plantarum is one of those strains. And what my mentor, Dr. Michael O'Brien, did is he took that strain and he put it through a toxic soup and ran a sine wave through it, and only about 2% survive. And they essentially mutate to develop a variety of really potent capabilities over above even L. plantarum, which is a very robust, aggressive bacteria culture.
Okay.
We have the patent information on our website, U.S. patent of what that is. I'm not allowed to say it on podcasts, stuff like that, because it's so potent. But basically, it digests protein.
Okay.
Undigested protein in your intestinal tract is the number one cause of leaky gut, bloated bellies, constipation. It also, undigested proteins feed what they call bad bacteria, which produce toxins like indole and skatol. That if you're waking up in the morning with crusty eyes, bad breath, brain fog, it's a good indication that you have suboptimal bacteria eating undigested protein in your stomach and creating all these other pathogenic components. Same thing when you have leaky gut, you don't have that film on the tissue, then undigested proteins can leak into the system, and the body sees that as invaders and attacks. Well, P3M sees any protein in the body that comes into the system as something that needs to be broken down. Now, that can be protein on pathogens, protein on viruses, protein that's been undigested from what you've eaten. All of that, it sees it, attacks it, breaks it down, digests it, and that has significant health advantages because it now becomes a regulatory force by destroying the bad bacteria in their food sources, allowing your good bacteria and your good flora to develop and cultivate into the colonies. And so there's 6 different tests that they do to test the robustness of a bacteria, how resistant it is to bacteria, to antibiotics, to difficult conditions. And in our experiments at the Birch International University, which we have a partnership with, we have 20 PhDs and master students over there. It's undefeated with, there's no bacteria strain that we've been able to develop that is better or stronger. And we've tested hundreds and hundreds of types. We're continuing to do more experiments, and because we believe that we're going to have to build these super probiotics for humanity to survive in the coming millennium with all the weirdness that's going on in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So this probiotic is going to work synergistically with the enzymes that contain all, right? I mean,
correct.
You're basically getting like a double hit then, right? In a sense.
Right. Yeah. We have these little packets we call the ultimate digestive formula, which is 3 masszymes, 1 hydrochloric acid tablet, and 2 P3OM. And that stack, especially as we get older, we tend to produce less hydrochloric acid. That stack it'll digest almost anything.
Is the P3OM, is that something that you can stay on indefinitely, or should you cycle it?
Well, I have not gone off P3OM since 2004. So I've been literally on that stuff for, it'll be 20 years this January.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
And I take mine at night. Is that recommended? Or?
Yeah, that's most common. Most people will take it at night before you go to bed because it's a transit strain. It'll go through the whole body, clean up your blood, clean up everything. It's a really good, it's like the janitor for your body. It cleans up all the bad guys, all the loose ends. And the other thing you can use it for is if you have food poisoning, it's undefeated against.
That's what I was just going to ask you.
Take like 10 immediately from the discomfort, then wait 30 to 60 minutes, take 10 more. And if you need it after that, do it another hour later, do 10 or more, and you're usually done. When I see it, I just take a bottle, hand a handful to people. And I've seen people on the ground, ready to go to the hospital. 30 minutes later, they're completely fine.
Wow, that's amazing. And do you know what if someone's taking, because I now know there's a lot of people that is using activated charcoal as part of their supplement regime. Do you know that if someone's using activated charcoal and they were taking either the P3OM or even the enzymes, if that would somehow inhibit the absorption of those?
It could. Activated charcoal is extremely potent and it sucks up everything.
Right.
So if you're utilizing it, you want to use it judiciously and in conjunction. So, for example, I think Dr. Shade makes a really good liver cleanse where he does you the liver sauce. And then 30 minutes later, you take the charcoal. You don't take anything with it because as the liver releases the toxins within, it gets captured in the charcoal and then removed out. So my suggestion would be to take your probiotics at least 4 to 6 hours. For sure. And if you're using charcoal like that, again, those are better used in a detox situation. I know David Wolf uses a lot of charcoal. By the way, he's the number one seller of our magnesium product. It's the number one selling product on the site, I should say. And he uses charcoal particularly in the detoxification phase. So he's a believer in enzymes and other things like that. He's like, use that, clean the system out. And then these other things are different adjuncts. So the right thing at the right time. I wouldn't use both at the same time. I think it would be counterproductive.
Yeah, I wouldn't probably choose to do that either. I just have one other question in regard, because people want to know, protein always seems to be like the topic of the day. And so how do you feel as you're aging and being active as you are, and I'm assuming you're still resistance training and, doing those things, where do you fall? Because there's some camps, for example, like Peter Attia talks about protein as we age becoming more important because we want to circumvent sarcopenia. And yet there's on the other camp saying that no, proteins are going to be more acidic forming. And as we age, we actually want to keep the protein lower. Where do you fall on that?
Great question. It's not the concern of the protein. It's can you get the amino acids from it?
Right.
So we've looked at the equation and the assumption built into all the data is that if I put a gram of protein in, a gram of amino acids goes into my body. And that's not the case.
Yeah.
So the state of your digestive health, the availability of proteolytic enzymes, as well as the other enzymes, and a healthy microbiome that is concordant to your diet. So as someone that's on a ketogenic diet is going to be very different than someone on a plant-based diet from their microbiome.
Right.
Okay. So you want a microbiome that is concordant with your dietary practice so that you're converting the protein into the amino acid. So I would say that the quality of that conversion rate is going to determine the amount of protein. Now, in my own experience, I can say when in 2007, so I'm 35 at that time.
Okay.
I was able to compete on 85 grams of protein, and I was using enzymes and probiotics. At 50 last year, when I competed, I went up to about 120 grams of protein.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I felt about the same as I did at 85. So what I would say is there is a degradation through the aging process that I'm not as efficient. And all things considered, I have all the right digestive products on there. So I would say that probably a little higher as you get older, but not in the excessive level where kind of the bodybuilders live and die. So if you look at bodybuilders as a general group, they don't have long life expectancy.
No, they don't.
They all seem to cap out in their 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
And I think it's because they eat too much protein.
Yeah.
And so I think, it's kind of, we're trying to find the Goldilocks zone.
Exactly.
And you can just monitor things like creatinine levels, which is determine how much exercise, how much breakdown you're going in there. You can look at your, your phytic acids. Do I have oxalates in the blood? Do I have these type of things? So that's going to vary from person to person, as well as what biohacking equipment that you may be engaging. Are you using red light? Are you using hyperbaric chambers? Are you doing all these other factors can influence your capability? Are you on hormones or not? Because for example, testosterone increases protein synthesis at the cellular level. But senescent cells, why a cell dies or gets decrepit as we age is because protein builds up in the cell and doesn't able to leave. And that's what kind of makes us old and stiff and degenerative. So you want to find that happy middle. So what do? I do believe that periodic detoxification, fasting one day a week, eating high quality protein that you're taking, doing resistance training at the frequency and intensity that you can recover from using those things, and optimizing the nutritional supplements around the suboptimal aspects of your diet correlated with your genetics. And I think I think it's realistic to expect that we can live healthily to 100 and beyond. So right now, life expectancy is around 80. I think we can add another 20% onto that. So you have a standard deviation around 95. So there's going to be some get into the 105 zone, and some people are going to be 85. But everybody's going to be doing really well at that age. And I think that's
they're not going to be hobbling around with with a cane.
That's right. Yeah.
Do you follow Brian Johnson at all?
I do, actually.
What are your thoughts on? I follow him too, and I find it kind of fascinating, just his whole routine. And
well, he's essentially the first, what I would call, longevity bodybuilder. So coming from the bodybuilding community and seeing the extreme nature of the physiques that emerge, especially on the highest level where they're using all the hormone augmentation and all the things. I'm going to the Mr. Olympia next week. That is the most dedicated freak zone individuals you can imagine. And they're all high performance athletes, but bodybuilding is a 24-hour sport because of the diet.
Yeah. Yep.
Brian Johnson has essentially taken that bodybuilder's mentality and applied it to the field of longevity. And the thing about him that's unique is he doesn't have a limitation on the resources that would stop most people.
Right.
He's very scientific based. So I see him as a race car driver, as a longevity expert. I suspect, given his commitment to the process, this isn't a criticism. I think he's doing a great service to the world. He'll probably end up with some unexpected dysfunction from all the different things you're doing, because in cumulative effect, I don't know what the outcome would be.
Right.
But I think that he's producing a tremendous amount of value to the world from that. And I think he's committed to the process. And what some people see strange or weird, and there's certainly a strangeness and weirdness to it, just like there's a strangeness and weirdness to see a 300-pound bodybuilding guy.
Yeah,
it's weird, it's strange.
Yeah, totally.
But it's still very impressive. And I salute him for the efforts. And I do, I'm fascinated by being a casual bystander to the whole process.
Yeah, that's me too. I like looking at his videos. I end up watching a lot of the podcasts that he's on, because it's very just someone who is holistic and tries to do all the things. And like I said, kind of focusing now on longevity. It's like, oh, maybe there's some things in there that, obviously it would take $2 million a year to do all of it, but we can take some. But I always ask my guests one question at the end of the podcast. So I'm going to ask it to you. And the question is, what is your authentic life print, your unique expression in the world as Wade Lightheart?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't think I've been asked that. Well, I guess I don't know how to answer this exactly, but I'll do my best.
Okay.
I believe that there is an infinite stream of consciousness that permeates all physicality, all things, that everything emerges from and goes back into. And the spinning out of that divine light, which is infinite and forever, sometimes referred to as God, divinity, the universe, etc., expresses itself in unique notes, much like the sound of a music note that you hear. There's a rise, a crest, and a fall, which is separated by the silence. And so I hope that I can take and play that note as clearly and as well as I possibly can. And for me, that means being in service to all the other notes in the symphony, which are the people, the places, the things, the plants, the animals, the birds, the bees, whatever, all that sort of stuff. And to play my tune, so to create more harmony in the world and to embrace that, and to take whatever I learn and to share it with everybody that I can who's interested in the things that I am, and as well as not to be too condemnative of people who aren't interested or not interested or down on me. That's not easy.
As possible.
It's not easy, but it's certainly a lot of fun. And I like doing it. So
I love that. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. And so I know that I'm going to have a discount link, and I'll add that in my show notes for any of the products on your website. And I guess people can just find you. Where are a few places that people can find your products? And
yeah, BioOptimizers.com. We're on Facebook and social media and Instagram and all that sort of stuff. We have a team that does that. And I think if people really want to explore this, they can look at this amazing Bible we have in the back. Let me grab a copy here. It's
the Ultimate Nutrition Bible.
Yes. So this is a book that Matt and I just created. It's a textbook.
Oh, wow.
Don't let it disturb you. Basically, we break down all of the major dietary strategies, show their strengths and weaknesses. We share with you the kind of tests that you can do to find out exactly which diet might be right for you, what aspects you can address in your own genetics, your own optimal, whatever goal that you want to do, whether it's an endurance athlete, whether it's cognitive health, to live a long time, to be a strength athlete, lose body fat. It's basically a choose your own adventure sequence. And we believe it's the most unbiased book on nutrition ever produced. Amazing. And he's a keto guy. I'm a plant-based guy. We have a company together. I don't think we could have wrote that book if we didn't have arguments for 20 years.
Yeah.
And we've found common ground, and we found common ground through a variety of different ways of going about it. I think it's a great resource for people. So if they could pick up a copy of that, that would be awesome. I think
that's amazing.
They would feel the value.
Yeah, I guess it's just recognizing, that we're all on our own unique journey, and, what's resonant to one may not be resonant to another. And it's not that one size fits all, right? We have different goals, different things that may or may not be in alignment with us as sovereign human beings. So yeah, that's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I have absolutely loved every minute of this. It's so much gratitude.
Me as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Thank you, Wade.